During the early 1900s, when birth control was surrounded by negative stigma and was banned from being dispersed, Margaret Sanger devoted her life to fighting for better access to birth control. Throughout her life, she published numerous articles, pamphlets, and books to inspire women. Through the publications, Sanger expressed that there was nothing women could do to safely control their family size and allow themselves to rise out of poverty. Women were also subject to severe health issues associated with multiple pregnancies and could not escape the results. She believed this was wrong and devoted much of her life to fighting the beliefs and policies that stopped women from controlling their pregnancies. Women had very limited knowledge of birth control. Margaret Sanger was one of the first advocates for these rights, allowing women to cross the frontier of reproductive rights. She generated a movement inspiring thousands of women to challenge the attitude of the era. As early as 3000 BCE, birth control was a regular practice. It wasn't until the 1800s that birth control was deemed immoral by the Catholic Church. This stemmed from the expectation that women were to remain pure. Another obstacle to universally available birth control was the 1873 Comstock Law, which was enforced by Special Agent Anthony Comstock of the United States Post Office and banned any material considered obscene, immoral, or indecent from being sent through the mail. The government saw this law as a way to protect children from corruption and crime. While this law was originally enacted to combat the spread of pornography in the early 1900s, the sections about birth control were among the most rigidly enforced. Yet another obstacle was the general public. At this time, most people believed that having a child was a blessing and that it was not to be avoided. American birth control advocate Margaret Sanger was the sixth of 11 children born to Anne and Michael Higgins. Her mother died at age 50 from tuberculosis after being severely weakened by 18 pregnancies. The poverty of Sanger's childhood and her mother's untimely death contributed to her passion for fighting for women's rights and birth control. Sanger's journey began in 1902, when she took a position at White Plains Hospital. While working as a nurse, many women begged her for advice on how to avoid another pregnancy. These occurrences largely inspired her to fight for better access to and education about birth control. Sanger wanted every woman to be able to control their body and began her fight by writing What Every Girl Should Know in 1912. These articles simply informed women about the act of sex, but progressively became more daring, elaborating on human physiology and claiming that sex was a normal act that should not be ignored. Critics believed giving women accurate information about sex would cause them to fear both sex and marriage. These articles violated the Comstock Law and were therefore banned from being sent through the mail. Despite this, Sanger continued to write. Her next project was a pamphlet entitled Family Limitation, which claimed that women had the right to enjoy sex without fear of the results. Sanger discussed common misconceptions about preventing pregnancies, but the main focus was on what women could do to prevent pregnancy. Sanger detailed many birth control methods including condoms, the pessary, sponges, and vaginal suppositories. Due to the Comstock Law, she found it near impossible to find a publisher willing to take the risk. While in search of a publisher for Family Limitation, Sanger began her work on The Woman Rebel. 8 issues were published, educating women on sex and reproduction, contraception, and love and marriage. The Woman Rebel was one of the earliest publications to address issues prominent in the lives of working-class women. It opened up conversations about birth control and created a space where women could rebel against oppression. This publication received much attention for its direct and indirect allusions to birth control. Sanger's opponents claimed that The Woman Rebel was crudely written and displayed an unrestrained nature of women. Due to this controversy, Sanger was arrested for violating the Comstock Law. She gave up publications of The Woman Rebel and fled to England to escape her arrest. Upon her departure, she had 100,000 copies of Family Limitation sent out. Her arrest created much commotion, but to her dismay, the government dropped her case upon realizing it would only create more support for her cause. Although disheartened by her dropped case, Sanger persisted. She began her work on the nation's first birth control clinic, which opened on October 16, 1916. Located in the notoriously poor and underdeveloped Brownsville district of Brooklyn, New York, the clinic taught women how to take control through contraception and about the reproductive system in attempts to help them break the cycle of poverty. Sanger and her sister, Ethel Byrne, also a nurse, gave 10-cent informative lectures and pamphlets on contraception. Hundreds of women came to the clinic seeking advice. However, after only 9 days, it was closed by the authorities for violating the Comstock Law. Again, Sanger knew this would only draw more attention to her cause. Sanger and her sister were arrested and received 30 days in jail. Sanger was offered a deal. If she agreed to respect the Comstock Law, she would receive a pardon. She refused and spent her time in jail educating inmates on the importance of birth control. Upon her release, Sanger again took to writing, and in 1917 published articles in the Birth Control Review, but they did not generate the reaction she was aiming for. Readers were disappointed that it included no actual advice on contraception, but Sanger did not know how to give people what they wanted without receiving another jail sentence. Sanger's next book, Woman in the New Race, was published in 1920. She believed women had to be able to make their own choice, and the way to do so was through contraception. Sanger also refuted the claim that birth control was immoral, believing that the only immoral things were bringing unwanted children into the world and allowing the government to pressure women into large families. Sanger also included quotes from concerned women who pleaded for her advice. One woman wrote, "I would like you to advise me what to do to prevent from having any more, as I would rather die than have another. I am keeping away from my husband as much as I can, but it causes quarrels and almost separation." Another woman expressed how she felt like little more than a breeding machine. Sanger addressed many of these concerns in her future writings. Sanger's next publication was a book published in 1922. In The Pivot of Civilization, Sanger says, "Birth control is an ethical necessity for humanity today because it places in our hands a new instrument of self-expression and self-realization." Sanger believed that women were the key to future generations, and they needed to reject the belief that they were inferior to generate change. Sanger's books served to do something no other publications had: educate women about their bodies and rights. It was clear Sanger's work was gaining much attention, and the following year, in 1923, Sanger returned to open a clinic, the Birth Control Clinical Research Bureau in Manhattan. Here, she provided birth control to women and collected data on its long-term effectiveness. The same year, she integrated the American Birth Control League, which investigated the global impact of population growth. With her publications and clinics, it seemed Sanger was making a real impact, pushing through boundaries and forging a path for generations to come. But Sanger may have wanted more than to simply help women and families to control their lives. She believed in eugenics, the idea that human populations could be improved by selectively breeding for desired traits. She was so deeply invested in her cause that she aligned herself with ableist and white supremacist organizations. In a 1925 speech, The Children's Era, Sanger compares children to a garden, saying, "You cannot have a garden if you let weeds overrun it. So if we want to make this world a garden for children, we must first of all learn the lesson of the gardener. So far, we have not been gardeners." By stating that certain traits were more desirable than others, she opened up a whole new world for birth control. Although she gained more widespread use of birth control, she also gained more adversaries, destroying much of her credibility. Although Sanger's association with eugenics tainted the reputation of both her and the American Birth Control League, which became Planned Parenthood, her fight for legalized birth control to be universally available allowed women to decide when and how many children they would have. Alexis McGill Johnson, president of Planned Parenthood, spoke out about Sanger's association with eugenics, saying,
"We can no longer afford to reconcile or revise Margaret Sanger's legacy. We must reckon with it."
Not only were Sanger's contributions to reproductive rights vital to a woman's health, but they also allowed women to rise from poverty with more educational and economic opportunities. The work that Sanger put forth allowed women to control their reproductive rights for the first time since the 1800s. Although the Comstock Law was not repealed until 1965, only a year before Sanger's death, her work inspired women to fight for their reproductive rights. Her life's work showed women they could take control of their lives. Women were able to prevent unwanted pregnancies that would only push them further into poverty. She allowed women to not only understand their bodies, but also that they had a right to decide what to do with them. Sanger's work contributed to the development of the birth control pill in 1960, which was a huge breakthrough for women and allowed them to take a single pill every day to prevent unwanted pregnancies. Her fight for reproductive rights did not end with her death. Her work continued to pave the way for women, and her research was used to help develop other birth control methods, such as the intrauterine device in 1967. Today, due in large part to Sanger's work, women can walk into any drugstore and purchase many different forms of contraception without a doctor's prescription, giving the woman control rather than a doctor. However, the fight that Sanger began is still being fought. Margaret Sanger fought for legalized birth control to be universally available to women. Current events, such as the overturning of Roe v. Wade, continue to challenge these rights, and the work that Sanger put forth continues to aid in the fight.